it's so easy to get stuck in your money mess that you don't start to make shifts. All right, welcome back to Moms Makin Dough. I'm your podcast host, Kendra Hewitt, and today I want to answer my first frequently asked question from listeners. And that is, where do I start when my money is a total mess? How I more frequently hear it is a disaster, or chaotic. And let me start with this disclaimer. We all will go through periods of time when ma managing and sometimes our money is a mess of some sort. That's part of the evolution of growing and managing your money, is you will go through periods of time when something needs to be cleaned up, and there's a lesson there for you in that learning, right? There's a lesson in there in that challenge for you. And I know a lot of you listening right now are probably like, I'm done with the challenges and the learning. But they still keep coming up for you, probably because you're resisting the learning. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, like, what is the process I would follow even when I'm working with someone, getting them through usually a financial um, I don't wanna say episode, but I don't love to use the word crisis, but a financial challenge within their business. I'm gonna speak to it from both contexts because the formula is going to be the same on how you're going to address what your money mess is, and start to do the cleanup. So first off, the first step always is gonna be really getting clear on the one thing, not everything that needs to be focused on, but the thing that needs to be focused on first. And what I find here is really starting to ask yourself, what is most of us, if we kind of close our eyes and get quiet, we can really know the answer to the one thing that's really holding us back. The question is do we really wanna tell ourselves the truth about that at this moment in time? So getting really clear on the one thing you wanna focus on first. Some common scenarios I said I would share is just like a lot of people, the 2 most common scenarios I would say that come up the most is cash flow, so a cash flow crisis of some sort, and or clearing debt, like being overcome by debt, whether it is personal debt, business debt, debt to even friends or family. I feel like those are 2 of the ones that really just put people into some sort of financial tailspin where everything becomes messy and chaotic, and it's so easy to just focus on the mess instead of the actual cleanup. It's so easy to get stuck on what you should have done differently instead of what I call the gap, than what you could be doing right now to start to change the situation, even though you know that time is going to take it's gonna run it on its own timing, or I like to say on God's timing. So, really getting clear is the number one thing that you need to focus on, is like, what is the thing you need to shift on first, the focus on first. So, I'm going to use the clear debt and the cash flow crisis as both of my examples, just for sake of ease of what that is. And when I say get clear on the one thing you want to focus on, you want this to be really concise. Like I said, it's either clear debt, or in my example is going to be create cash flow because you're in a cash flow crisis of some sort. And that could be income, that could be revenue, it could be either or. Like I said, we're going to look at both professional and personal on answering this question. Next thing is you need to get your facts clear, right? So notice that both of these, getting clear on the one thing you want to focus first and getting clear on the facts, your current facts. Clarity here is absolutely power. Um, I think that a lot of us really need clarity more often than not in every aspect of our life, but money is one that clarity really reigns supreme. And when I say get the facts, what I want to really be clear is discerning our facts from our feelings about the situation that we're in, the mess we are in, the money mess we've created. Because it is what happens, I find here, is that you want to think about presenting the facts as you were going to be in court. And my husband and I have just been watching that show. It's an older show. We really like it. It's called Goliath, and it's Billy Bob Thornton. He's a attorney in it. And one of the things is that he's a trial attorney, and he's very well known that as like one of the best trial attorneys in this show. And um, in the first season, he's on this case that he's actually fighting his old business partner who's representing the other party. And it really is so amazing because what's really interesting to me, I don't watch a lot of like law type shows. It's not been like top of my list, but what's so interesting on this show is that I love watching their arguments of how they present their case. And, like, it's such a key example of, like, how clear communication really makes a difference. But when they're presenting their case, one of the common things is, like, if they bring up something that is not factual and tends to be more opinionated or, feelings based, where they're trying to elicit a feeling of some sort from who is ever on the witness stand, they quickly, the other party, the defending party will say objection, and the judge will say overruled or abstained or whatever they say, right? But I want you to think about when you are looking at your money facts that you are presenting in court, like, hey, here's the facts. Here's the actual amount of debt I have. Here is the actual amount of income I brought in last month. These are where you want to be, not guessing, not guesstimating. You want to be really real and actual. This is where details really matter because for you to be able to make progress, you need to live in facts and not in fantasy. And when you guess, you live in fantasy. And you're setting yourself up for disappointment when you don't hit what you want because you weren't real and raw with your facts. So, getting the facts. How much debt do you actually have? Like, what's the exact number? How many credit cards is it on? What are their rates? Like, these are things that would be facts when it comes to debt. What are you bringing in? And then, like, a fact versus a feeling would be like, what do you actually need to bring in means that you need that number. You need the facts of like, hey, here's what I brought in and here's what I'm spending. Not what do you want to bring in. This is where we're focusing on, like I said, the facts. And then the third step is going to be like, what is the one habit or behavior that you can identify that probably needs to shift, change, or perhaps even be eliminated for you to start to get some momentum or clear action steps to start to shift this. So you can do the first two, get clear on what you want need to focus on. In my scenario, I think I'm going to use the clearing debt as an scenario and on a personal level, and then I'll use the create cash flow on a professional level, like if you are a business owner listening to this. And then with the facts, if you're clearing debt, you need to know how much your debt you currently have. And if you are looking at cash flow, you need to know, hey, what is that cash flow number? And a lot of people are like, oh, that's simple. I'll just look at my P&L. And I'm like, you need to look at the numbers that really matter to you, the number you want to focus on. There are some people when it comes to cash flow that are actually generating a lot of cash flow, but they're spending more of their cash flow than they are actually allocating to their profit. And they're different. There's a difference between cash flow and profit. Let's be very clear with that. Again, another episode for another day. But I want you to just really start to think about you could get clear on those two things. What's the first thing I want to focus on? And what are my current facts? And then you could stop there and you would have no change. Where you start to see some shift and change is when you start to implement the third step, which is going to be, what is that habit or behavior I need to start to shift? What is the one thing I need to start to eliminate possibly? So, some kind of examples here, just to bring this to life for you, is that like if you're focusing on clearing debt and you have $8,000 worth of credit card debt, let's put it that way, and it's across three different credit cards. Maybe your habit is that like, hey, I need to have a less credit card, a, maybe a lower limit. Maybe I need to start paying intercycle payments instead of just my minimum payment. Maybe I need to make chunks of a payment. Maybe I need to look at it every week instead of every month at the end of the month when the statement's closed. These are some of the things that, like, right away, some of these habits that you know you either have or lack, you're going to start to know what those are. And I want you to focus in again on the one habit that really would make a shift for you. When it comes to cash flow, one of the things I see with a lot of my business owners I work with is that a lot of them have leads that have been generated, but they actually haven't been followed up with. For example, they have a accounts receivable that's continued to grow but never gets addressed. Let's say they haven't adjusted their prices in a really, really long time or even looked at their packaging and their pricing. Maybe they have no idea what part of their products really produce revenue for them versus what they don't, because they're just looking at their numbers off their P&L, which is prepped by their bookkeeper who doesn't really understand what's going in their business. They're just inputting numbers in where it's necessary, really for tax purposes, right? So, just really starting to think they're focused on your taxes and your accounting, your things like your balance sheet, and what are the things in your cash flow that are really specific to you that you know you need to shift? Maybe it is, hey, I got an average of 10 leads this month, but I know I need to be at 15 to really create more cash flow. Um, so just starting to really think on this level is like, what is that one habit? I like to say this step number three is going to really be your domino. This is the one thing that you really want to take a look at as a habit that, like, if you started confronting it, if you started shifting it, if you started changing some of the ways you did this one habit, that possibly you would start to shift yourself into momentum in other direction rather than the monetary mess that you've created up until this point. And then next step is going to be really setting a target. And I spent my whole last episode talking about how I reverse engineer my business targets. And this is also applies to how you actually set up your personal money targets as well. So let's roll with the theme of clearing your debt as a personal target. But we need to get really specific here. I personally like to I set my money targets for myself once a month, but I also set them for in a quarterly basis, right? So I break them down and reverse engineer them on a quarterly basis. But I want you to really start to think about using the debt as an example is like, could you do things like clear all of your retail cards by the end of Q1? So right now it's February. I'm recording this episode. And then I want you to think of like, we technically have one more month left in March, right? For of Q1. So really think, I mean, just time flies so quickly, and it's so easy to get stuck in your money mess that you don't start to make shifts. You still have a whole month, 30 plus days of making a shift in the positive direction for your money. So let's talk a little bit about like if clearing debt is your goal, is like there's a couple strategies and I'm just going to throw them out. They might not be the ones that work for you. I just want to give you some feedback and ideas of what they could be. Shift to a 0% card, right? So you might have really good credit and be getting offers for 0% cards, and you might be carrying a balance on one of your cards at, let's say, 20%. That's conservative. Most of these credit cards I find are like 25. Retail cards most of them start at 29 plus per, APR, so annual percentage rate, right? So you're paying like, yeah, you got great deals at Macy's and Kohl's, but you're paying this extra money on these cards that just isn't in alignment with where you really wanna go. So maybe it's clear all of your retail cards. So starting with going back to the facts, I would start to look at the facts of like, "Hey, I have 2 retail cards, and this is their current balance. Here's their current percentage, and my goal is by the end of March, those are gone. End of Q1, they are gone, and then I could go back to the old has anybody ever heard that trick where it's like you freeze your credit cards in your freezer, like you put it in a bucket of ice so that they're hard to they're hard to access? It sounds so silly, but I'm like, "Man, there's something so" I forget there's a name for that principle where it's like, you're not taking something away, but it's starting to, you can't spend what you don't have to spend, right? So it's kind of the smaller portion method of like, I love that actually this is a really good metaphor to teach here, is that like, have you ever heard of, like, one of a ways that they used to teach to lose weight is like eat on a smaller plate, right? And that's a really good one for your money, right? Of like, instead of having this huge plate where your unconscious mind is teaching you to fill the whole plate, and then your conditioning from your childhood teaches you that you have to be part of the clean plate cup, is that what if you reduce the size of the plate? So this is really where you're starting to set a target where you're starting to leverage the habit that you know you need to reduce into a target and put it so it has clear and concise action behind it. Another way, like let's talk about it when it comes from a cash flow perspective. A 10% increase in cash flow. Let's say that's your goal. So if you brought in $10,000 in revenue last month, and now a 10% increase would be $11,000 this month. So starting to set a baby step target, something that's reasonable, because remember, we're at reasonable targets at this point for one reason. You're in a money mess. We don't want to set these unreasonable targets at this point. We want to set a reasonable target that allows you to start to identify the right action that you can take to then gain some momentum to start to clean up the mess that you created, right? And that's also another, I think, really important key here is messes with your money don't really get cleaned up until you to actually take your responsibility. Just like any other area of your life, if you're not taking your responsibility for how you got there in the first place, then how you're coming from a victim standpoint where something happened to you instead of a empowered standpoint where you can actually control what's going to happen in the future. So I think that's one of the biggest things with dealing with a money mess is that you just have to really come to the real hard reality of what is the truth that got you in this place so that you can start to shift so that that actions you're taking on a more consistent basis aren't going to continue to lead you back into this messy loop. Or maybe it's like I talked to you about before. Maybe it's like you have a really big accounts receivable. Maybe you have $5,000 in business that's just hasn't been accounted for in terms of collected. And maybe there's someone on your team that can start help to do that. And that needs to be come their focus. Maybe that's the focus you need to do as the hustler in your business. Maybe that you're in more of a startup phase or a side hustle where you're your best employee, right? Which, let's face it, if you own a business, you're usually your best employee regardless. Our hope is that you get an employee that can be long term as good as you, but at the end of the day, you're always your best employee, just like you're always your best investment. So, this is where, like I said, you just want to set a target that's super clear, and has a deadline. So, like I said, there's like by the end of Q1, I'm going to pay off all of my retail cards in the amount of, and you can be really specific if you want to here. But remember that the real details were outlined in your facts, the facts portion of it. And then the next step and the final step is going to be the one that is easy to talk about, but not as easy to implement. And if you did nothing today with what we just went through, this is where the make or break line is. And that is this: you can have the most highly crafted plan on how to get out of your money mess. But if you do not take a forward action to it, even after you listen to this today, then you will just the chances of you staying where you are at in the mess you are currently at in and or it getting bigger increase exponentially. So my goal in sharing this part is that making a plan is part of this, but taking the first step in action is the bigger part of this step 5. So I want you to really think about like, hey, if it's clearing debt, it is, today I'm going to set interest cycle payments up, which means every week they get paid instead of the minimum payments. And I'm going to pay over what that minimum is until that balance is gone. Maybe it's on business. I'm going to look at what my marketing was last month, and I'm going to meet with our marketing person and set a target for, hey, I need to have 15 leads instead of the 10 that we hit last month because I want to increase our cash flow by the end of the month by 10%. Or maybe it's like I said, maybe it's that accounts receivable where you have all these open invoices and they just need to be collected on. The people just need to be reminders. I had this example happen with me yesterday on a client I had billed, and I had sent it out and I just didn't know it, but she didn't see it. And I was wondering, I was like, "That's not like her to not pay an invoice." And so I literally just sent her an email. I was like, "Hey," I was like, "I'm just sending this email, again to make sure you got your invoice." And she's like, "I did not even see that." "Oh, here it is. It's in my spam." And then within the hour, she had paid it. So I really want you to think, just like little things like that. That was an action step for me, just in terms of like end of month cash flow is like looking at like, hey, where I'm at, what's outstanding that actually would be really low hanging fruit for me to reach out, grab, and take as an action step. So I hope this is super helpful for you to start to see that regardless of what mess you are in, and again, just like I said at the beginning, it is not a question of if, it is a question of when you will have some sort of money mess you need to clean up. And myself included, like I go through phases where it's like everything's going really great, and then oh, there's a surprise, like. And now, as you get older, you start to get better and better at looking for the gains and really focusing on how far you have come. But when you're in the mess, it's really hard to see past all of the debris and all of the disaster and the chaos that you're in. So these steps, the first, getting clear on where you want to focus first in your finances. Number 2, getting really, really with the facts that you are currently facing. Number 3, identifying the one habit or behavior that you know you need to change. And sometimes this can be a really simple habit. Sometimes it's something like, hey, I noticed that actually last week I got 5 coffees, and I mean, the cost of a coffee out now is unbelievable to me, but, like, I mean, I know people that spend $100 easy a week on coffee. That is not me, I don't value it that much, but just, like, a little habit like that of, like, in your personal finances of, like, these little bleeds where you're spending that you don't need to be spending. And let me be clear here too, looking at things that you are spending on that you don't really need to be spending is not a habit that's forced out of scarcity. It's more that you are working towards abundance. So you need to be aware of this is where details matter, of little things that start to get out of control and then they start to snowball into much bigger things. Where it's like, hey, every week I bought $100 worth of coffee and then this month I can't make my car payment. And all starting to figure out like what are the things that really you can shift when it comes to habits that you need to be honest with are not supporting or serving you when it comes to your finances at this stage of your life. Um, I'll give you an example on a family example. My daughter does gymnastics and she was going to like a gymnastics school and that's local, has a really good reputation to us, is pretty close to our house, like I said. So I had not thought anything of it. And I signed her up for that. And it was like $125 a month, reoccurring every month. And that was like for, like a once a week class for her. And but she's 4 years old. And one of the challenges I had with this place was that she was so distracted because this place is so big that there is multiple classes going on at one time. And half the times I would like watch her and she'd be like running over to someone else's class and or like coming out to be like, "Hey, I need water," or something silly or significant just because it was way too overstimulating of a place for her. And like I said, this place has a really good reputation. And so one day I was driving home and I live across from a YMCA. And I was like, I bet they have gymnastics. And I remember as a kid, they had a big gymnastics center at the YMCA that I went to, but this one's smaller. So somehow in my mind, I just said, I'll have to ask because I don't actually know. So I go in there, I ask, and mind you, this YMCA is directly across from the street that I live on. So I can walk to it. I was like, "Okay, no more rushing to get in the car, no more, like, like, stressing out about getting on, the main interstate there. I can just bring her across the street." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, we have a 10-week session, and it's 125." And I was like, "Wait a minute." So, I would have paid 125 a month at the other place, thought nothing of it, right? And now I can get basically almost double more than double, right, the classes. I get basically 2 for free, and I'm at half the cost, and it's across the street. And so one of the things that I, started to think about was, like, really, like, she doesn't need this level of gymnastics that I was currently paying for, and she can do something with much more simple across the street. It's in their gymnasium. Yeah, it's not a gymnastics center, but she's not going to the Olympics at 4 years old. So, I made that shift, and it was so funny because I thought about it the other day. I was talking with one of my girlfriends. She's like, "Oh, where's she doing gymnastics?" And I was like, "Man, that was a habit shift for me." Because the habit shift in my mind was, "Hey, I want her to be at this place where she like that is has a really good reputation for teaching them gymnastics." And then I realized that the place across the street was just as comparable for based on what they were doing at their age, and that it's a really, really good fit for her, and it just so happened that it was half the cost. So sometimes I was reminded of that story of like acres of diamonds, right? Sometimes you have diamonds hidden right in your backyard. So when we're talking about making habit shifts, I want you to not look so far outside your comfort zone that they could might be something super simple, like not going to Starbucks every day and maybe buying a nicer coffee machine that you can make coffee at home instead of the drive in the mental break to go get a coffee at Starbucks every day. Because here's what I find. Most of the people that are in a pretty big money mess of some sort, it's that they let little habits like this derail them over a period of time. Not a short period of time, a longer period of time, where it's not only did they pay for the double gymnastics class that they really didn't need, they also paid for the the Starbucks every week. And then they also didn't realize that their taxes went up on their and their mortgage. So that was another couple $100. And then there starts this very slippery slope of all of these habits that are just kind of sliding a little bit in different aspects where you start to not come back and really look at them like I'm encouraging you to do now, regardless of what type of money mess you're in. And then next step is going to obviously be, like I said, setting a goal, setting something that's reasonable within a short period of time. We are not talking setting a goal right now for 12 months from now. When you are in a money mess, you can really only see what is in front of you right now. And the goal is just to see a little bit ahead of where you could go, not be stuck in where you currently are at. Stay stuck in that mode. And then finally, you're going to make a plan and you're going to take your first action step. And that first action step should really be, I like to say, it's the rule of 72 within the next 3 days from you setting that plan and that action step, or else the chances of you doing it get really, really low. We say this in our practice is that like we try to really, from the time a new patient comes in to the time we see them for what we call their report of findings, is the rule of 72. My husband taught me this, where we really want no more than 3 days to go by where they don't lose momentum, that we can help them solve whatever the health problem they came in and presented. So I really want you to really look at what that action item is and make it something that's very concrete, that will be critical to you starting to gain momentum to get out of the current money mess you're in. Hope you guys enjoyed this frequently asked question. Keep them coming, keep the feedback coming. And please remember, if you liked this episode or if you know someone in a money mess that this might be able to help, please feel free to share it. And remember, all that is super helpful for me is if you rate, review, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Moms Making Dough.